Welcome back to another video on Ondas Capital / Holdings. And before we get into the video, I'd just like to thank everybody for the continued support on the channel. And we have surpassed the 900 subscriber mark. So with the last video's comments and the comments on this video, everybody will be entered into a giveaway and I'll be releasing the results on the next video. If you do enjoy the video, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe for your chance to get involved in the giveaways in the future. Thank you for the support. Right, Karl, welcome, and thank you very much for taking your time to come speak to me today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
For anyone who's watching who might not know who you are, who is Karl Eze?
Probably quite simply a defense technologist. So very much a mission-driven person, inquisitive, like to get under the hood of everything, don't take much at face value, and kind of delve into the tech, into the people, into the ideas behind any opportunity, really.
No, that's perfect. And you spent over 10 years serving in the British Army across multiple roles, from frontline operations to leadership and technology development. Looking back, what would you say are the biggest lessons or values that experience has taught you, and how do you continue to shape who you are today?
Yeah, I'd probably say it's a combination of things, really. It's a combination of flexibility. So both flexibility in action and thought. So again, not taking much by face value, actually challenging, kind of receive wisdom on things, and really just being ready to kind of go back to base principles in any idea, be it that around, from operations in Afghanistan, ground holding, being as a fire support team commander. So I was in control of a lot of the indirect fires, weapons in the battle space, and taking a different approach to things, really. I was very fortunate at the time that I had a very good officer commanding above me, who was the kind of company commander of the company group I was with. So being on that same wavelength, being very much kind of people focused rather than anything on the military output. But it's that same thought I've taken into defense technology as well. It's people first, then it's ideas, then it's equipment.
Nice, man. Nice. So you've worked in both corporate and defense worlds, including your time at Goldman Sachs. I always like to ask this. Here in the UK, investing and financial planning don't get the same focus as they do in the US. How important do you think it is for people here to start investing and plan ahead for their futures?
No, I think it's vital. I think that really there should be more of a focus on financial education, even in schools, really. It's not something which is always, maybe I'm wrong, I've not seen the current syllabus, but directly taught to kind of children at an early age. Being aware of that, being aware of the benefits of investing versus just kind of holding money in the bank, being aware of the fact that you can really kind of maximize returns by not just relying on, you have things like the kind of cash ISAs and stocks and shares ISAs, those kind of things, which is more of the kind of easy route in to that kind of area. But really, I think the education should start at school and continue throughout your life, because I think if you look across the pond to the US, I think people are much more engaged with the stock market than they are in the UK. So really, I think we should be doing more in that way.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, obviously, I obviously do a lot of that. Obviously, that's why I'm here today. But I never knew about that type of stuff until I started looking for it. So until you go looking for it, then you find it. It was never, my parents didn't know about it. Their parents didn't know about it. I talk to family members about it now, and they still can't. They think they can't really get to grips with it. So, but yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it should be a lot more focused in the education sector, even if it's like a college or high school thing. I think it should be at least a topic that's spoken about in school.
Yeah, even if kind of people do fantasy football and things like that, you should always have that kind of fantasy stock market in schools where you give some monopoly money, and then you kind of track what your investments would have done over time, so you can see what you would have earned versus just the interest rate or anything else.
Yeah, and like I say, when I was in high school, we had the fantasy league where on lunchtime you could go on your break and sit in IT and do that. So if you can do stuff like that, which is obviously incentives, surely there should be other types of incentives to learn financials and stuff like that that actually matter in life.
Yeah, definitely.
So your journey really spans so many worlds, from serving on the front line in Iraq and Afghanistan to managing hundreds of millions in defense tech projects, then moving into finance at Goldman Sachs, and now leading in tech and innovation. For people watching who are maybe early in their careers or going through big transitions themselves, what's the biggest lesson you've learned from adapting, taking risks, and continue to grow across completely different industries?
Yeah, I think it boils down to the fundamentals of anything. I think that it was explained to me before I went onto the veterans program at Goldman, and I was only with Goldman for kind of 6 months before kind of going into defense industry. But it was explained to me sometimes it's easier to make leaders bankers than bankers leaders. I think it's that. I think that leadership is one of those softer skills that we think of. But I think it's one thing, if you look at the common thread throughout kind of everything I've done, it's been the fact that, in the military, especially as senior non-commissioned officers all the way down to junior non-commissioned officers or kind of commissioned officers as well, leadership is at the core of what we do. And leadership is dealing with people, understanding the people you're in charge of, and understanding how to get the best out of them. You've very much got the mission, you've very much got the team, and you've very much got the kind of individuals that's kind of drawing them together. And I think that's the common thread for each of them, be it, obviously it's directly applicable in the military, it's directly applicable in banking, and going into defense tech. I think a lot of people, as I said before, kind of really focus on the technology and how do you get the best out of teams? That's kind of those soft skills that you really have to kind of delve into. What makes your software engineers tick? What are they motivated by doing versus what are they needing to do versus what they want to do, and make sure those two things are aligned so you get the best out of them, really. And so I think that, and that's carried through from when I was in the previous company where we had up to 40 software developers, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, and the rest of it, all the way through to kind of my role within starting up Point Zenith. We have some really keen, enthused people, but it's maximizing their potential, really. So I think it's that people focused, being very much driven by maximizing performance, but being kind of empathetic at its core. I think a lot of people have misconceptions of military people, but for the most part, I think it's the case of having that empathy to really kind of get under the weeds of what makes people tick and get the most out of them.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfect, and that's what I love doing about these interviews myself, because I always learn so much as well and take something great away, which is always great.
What was that not you were expecting?
Yes, like I say, it's always good because, like, speaking to yourself and Eric and Akuna as well, it's like I say, everyone's so different, so you never know what you're going to be presented with when you talk to someone. So it's always good because you learn something from everybody, and it's always a great learning experience. So you founded the British Army Drone Racing Association, which I think is such a unique concept. For anyone who's unaware of what that is, can you talk a little bit about how it came about, what it involves, and how projects like that help drive innovation and technical skills within the armed forces?
Yeah, sure. No, so British Army Drone Sports Association formally came into being Easter 2025, but really it's 10 years in the making. So I got into FPV drones in 2015, a chance meeting at a wedding, a conversation about drone racing, and then being a technologist. And at the time, I was at the Defense Academy doing a battlespace technology course. And so went home, started researching, started delving into technology, was captivated by it. That childlike fascination, all things that fly. I think a lot of people get into that around the drones, but really just started pulling on a thread. So went away, bought a small little kind of trainer drone, then bought some goggles in which to fly it, and then really delved into buying the components to build my first drone, to get in there. Then met a community of people, started racing nationally for the kind of British national drone racing, and then just got to a stage where I was posted at Army headquarters at the time. I thought, wrote a paper in 2016 about the military application of technology. I thought, there's something here which can be kind of harnessed by the military, and really had the idea from then. End of 2016, start of 2017, to start a drone racing team. So you naturally gravitate towards other people doing the same thing. So met up with a handful, very small numbers of people who are kind of equally as interested in all things improvised drones. Started racing with a group of them, started thinking about competitions. In 2017, it was the exact same time the Australians in the Australian Defence Force made their team. We started interacting kind of through social media. We thought, wouldn't it be great to organise an international competition? So yeah, they took the lead in organising the first one in 2018, which was great. We went out to Sydney with a handful of other nations, and then we tried to do one in 2019, but didn't quite get there. COVID then got in the way. 23 comes, they do the next one. Then I kind of promised, okay, come hell or high water, I'm going to make sure the next one is run in the UK. And so in that kind of 24 time, launched the Military International Drone Racing Tournament in the UK, held it at my unit, the HAC in central London, and really it just kind of started to snowball from there. I think, like anything, if you build it, they will come, but you also have to demonstrate stuff, demonstrate capability in order for people to take notice of it. Talk is cheap. You can talk about things all day long, but when you actually put something together, organize and put your kind of neck on the line, then people take note. And that allowed the ability for us to then start the formalized association. And really it played off the back of some work I did through my company Point Zenith with the Strategic Command Innovation Unit, J-Hub. So we did a thing called the J-Hub Drone Academy about how you can use racing drones to train the underlying concepts of operation and building and experimentation with kind of small drones you see. So really got into it from there. And really that was a project I first thought about kind of 4.5 years ago, which kind of didn't get there at the time because maybe it was a bit ahead of its time. And then, the world changes, things move on, and all of a sudden it becomes kind of highly interesting. So I've always, I guess, had that ability to kind of future gaze and see kind of spot trends in the earliest stage or before they've really developed.
Yeah, and again, that goes basically hand in hand with this next question. I think it's amazing seeing things like drone racing coming out of the military environment, blending fun, skill, and serious tech. Do you think projects like this can influence and inspire innovation in defence and commercial drone systems?
Yeah, definitely. So even going back to BADSA, the British Armed Drone Support Association, it's kind of a case that I saw it as a way of redefining the relationship between kind of drone technology and sport. Because if you look back in history, sports were around really to kind of practice military activities. You think of archery, you think of even back to the Greeks and the Romans and things like that. In terms of the ancient Olympics, a lot of the disciplines around there were replicating functions in warfare. And so really when I started BADSA, I kind of thought back to it and said, look, ultimately, I know the skill sets required in drone racing are very much applicable to defense capability. It's the same skill to fly a racing drone around fundamentally of the two-stick controls is to fly any other improvised quadcopter or multi-rotor around. But then I really went beyond just thinking about racing, because racing is great for building accuracy. If you're flying around a track and you're hitting 100 gates, that's 100-point target you're hitting when you're racing. So it's great for building that accuracy, but also we then had a look at, okay, so we want to develop the ability of the sport in terms of finding and striking targets. So, thinking outside the box, we then coined it drone orienteering and freestyle. So the same kind of skills. And if you make it competitive, it's a sport, but it enables soldiers to practice those important skills of finding targets and striking them in a competitive way as a sport. Then we said, okay, so technically with the British Army Model Aircraft Association, because we're using legacy permissions that have been around since the Royal Air Force Model Aircraft Association for pushing 70 years, but we'll never call ourselves that, otherwise we'll get no members wanting to join. But we use the same kind of legacy regulatory work. So we come under the Civil Aviation Authority, the British Model Flying Association, Article 16, which enables us to then do things like article drops. So we can do simulated bomb drop as a competition, which is another really important skill that soldiers need to learn. And we're venturing into doing drone interception as a sport, and actually then looking at autonomous drone racing. So all these key skills that a soldier needs in the modern battle space, think of it as a variation on modern pentathlon. All the skill sets a Victorian officer needed in terms of running, shooting, riding, fencing, and that type of thing. What are the skill sets a modern soldier needs, and how can we incorporate them into sport in a way which triggers their competitive nature? Because ultimately, soldiers are selected for their competitive nature, they're competitive people. And so enabling all these very low-level skills that are required at the lowest level, able to do in your own camp before you even kind of go and exercise under civilian rules, so it's very accessible. And that was the plan, that was the driver. But it's not just about training people how to control the drones. You train them how to build them as well. You train them how to experiment with them. So we live in an age where it's how many kids these days know how a mobile phone really works, down to its kind of nuts and bolts and base principles. Not many, but we're still at a time where drone technology is accessible enough that you can really delve into it very deeply in terms of how it works, how it functions, and how you layer other capabilities on top of that. So really the kind of secret sauce that I think of is actually isn't so much as training kind of operators, but training technologists who actually understand the technology. You can actually be the intelligent customer to help shape the technology going into the future. And so that's why I've kind of put a lot of my time and effort, a disproportionate amount of time and effort into really pushing that forward, because see it as being vitally important. So that's somewhere I know I can kind of add immediate value.
No, that's perfect, and I appreciate that. You're also the CEO of Point Zenith, which provides end-to-end regulatory management and operations support for unmanned aerial systems, working with everyone from OEMs to government departments. For anyone who's not familiar, can you talk a little bit about what Point Zenith does and how it's helping shape the next stage of UAS innovation and regulations?
Yeah, sure. So it's a Point Zenith. We do, fundamentally about regulatory compliance, or about training, and all those less obvious, less exciting parts of the defense drone industry, but not just for defense, but just across the drone industry. And the reason why we started it is from a previous company that myself and my co-founders were in. We're in a drone company. It was at the cutting edge of a very particular area of weaponized drones, and regulations was that stumbling block that you had to kind of fight your way through. So doing the post-mortem from that company, where we decided to kind of band together to start our own. And really we conducted the strategized the business model canvas, where we really looked into what are the actual value propositions that people in the industry need, what are the pain points, and how can we be that painkiller rather than being just that vitamin, so where people are actually going to want to kind of get after it. And so instead of just starting yet another drone company, which we initially intended to start a cool drone company because we wanted to do that, then we looked into starting and actually started simultaneously a company looking at collecting drone data and automating the detection of defects in housing stock in a completely different vertical. And then while we were trying to get those two off the ground, we started Point Zenith, because we just thought, cash business knowledge in our head. We got Dean Watson on board, who was our regulations guy. And that one, which we actually put the diligent work into solving a problem, ended up being the one which is successful, not the ones which are more vanity projects, effectively. And so what we do is we do a lot of the regulatory work in terms of, a lot of the neo primes use us. We enable them to demonstrate their capability under civilian aviation authority rules before they then get contracts with the military. We help them transition across from civil to military aviation authority. We help them, and that could be anything from beyond visual line of sight flight to heavy lift to article dropping, anything you think of. We enable that to happen. And not only do we do that in terms of enabling regulations, we also then enable training. So as I said before, we did the J-Hub Drone Academy, how you can mass train one-way attack drone operators utilizing drone racing as a vehicle for the basic underlying nature, but putting everything on online kind of tuition. So, we aptitude tested several hundred soldiers, sailors, aviators, and then those who selected, we gave them a backpack with everything they need to know about getting into drone racing with simulators through small training craft, how to build and rest of it, and set them on their way. And then we enabled you to train one person at the same rate you can train 1,000 or 10,000 people. You de-link them from being able to, or having to be sat in classrooms, really being kind of spoon-fed by instructors. And so when you marry those two things together, between the regulatory work we can do and then the mass training that we can do, you can really mass the adoption of drone operations wherever we go. And that can be in defense, or it can be in agriculture. So some of our investors come from an agricultural background, or into shipping. So we really want to kind of maximize the adoption of drone operations.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfect. So like I say, some people might obviously not know what Point Zenith was, so I think that gives a great description of exactly what it is. So
Yeah,
thank you.
and just tack on the back of that. So when we started, we realized we made a nice little consultancy, but then we realized that if you want to scale and grow, you need access to kind of exponential growth. And so what we did we did our first kind of small funding round last year, and now we're currently going for our Series A. And really what we're getting after is we're creating that compliance platform which knits everything together for our current clients or for any additional clients, which means that you can collect the single version of truth for all the data you have to present to regulators. And then it also then means that you can Rosetta Stone between different regulatory environments, be it CAA in the UK, EASA in the US, so in EASA in the EU or FAA in the US. So it almost creates that Rosetta Stone. So really creating that platform is kind of what's really most interesting to us at the moment, and how we kind of serve the industry more widely.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And what was it that made you want to be a part of the Ondas Capital team? Like, what was it that stood out about their mission or approach to what made you wanted to get involved?
Yeah, so for me, I'd met James Acuna previously. We'd spoken. A lot of our thoughts kind of really chimed, and so when the opportunity came around for him with Ondas Capital, he then approached me in terms of heading up and leading the UK team. And really, it's wanting to have that. Everything I do is very mission driven. That's what really motivates me, and I think the mission of Ondas, getting after high technology readiness level, battle proven technology, to kind of invest in that and help it scale. I think that's vitally important across the industry, and not so much just from a more of a financial background or financial basis, but I'm a soldier like at heart, and so for me it's about how we keep the West safe against those who wish to do us harm. And so being able to get after what actually works and scale it out, I think is fundamentally important. It's we talk about that kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that bottom rung is security. And so what motivates me is kind of helping to sustain that security layer on which you build the rest of society, on which you build your financial sector, on which you build everything everyone else does. So if you can't keep your own kind of home safe, then you're onto a loser.
Yeah, totally. And obviously, we all now know that Ondas Capital is deploying around $150 million, and you're serving as a UK strategic advisor. Can you share a little bit about what your role involves and what kind of innovation and technology areas Ondas Capital is mainly focused about, especially here in the UK?
Yeah, so when you look at me sat here in the UK with my background, it's very much a case of the UK is an absolute hotbed for technology, a hotbed for startups. If you look at the fact that I think that the UK is underserved, to be perfectly honest, insofar as it's not so much now today in 2025, but when I first got into defense technology startups, drone startups in 2018, you could barely get a bank account. You could barely get any kind of funding. There weren't venture capitalists kind of falling over themselves to put money into defense. And that situation is changing, or has changed. People speak now about dual use technology investing. So you're increasingly seeing a lot more people kind of get into defense, and having the largest land war in Europe since the Second World War with the Russo-Ukrainian war focuses people's attention really. And so for that, what you see now is that it's getting easier to get dual use investing or defense investing from VC level, but really you then see a bit of a gap really. So going from angel investing or family office into VCs and beyond is increasingly difficult. So Ondas, in my opinion, is something that goes beyond that. We're not a VC. We go beyond that. We're able to do things slightly differently and really look at what is going to be the most successful, what are going to be best plays. And from my position, being sat in the UK, I think there are plenty of very good underserved technology companies in the UK which are doing stuff into Eastern Europe, which are kind of really the driving power behind UK industry. And I think it's a shame usually that a lot of these companies get to a certain size and then they usually they leave the UK, they jump outside, they head across the pond if they want to get kind of high finance. So for me, it's kind of really focusing on how we can maximize the kind of companies in the UK which are really kind of feeding into that defense tech environment, be it in drones or be it in artificial intelligence, robotics, communications, any of those kind of key areas really.
Yeah, no, that's great. Like I say, because I think that's going to go a little bit into the next question as well, which is with the new drone factory being built in Swindon for 26, it feels like the UK is really starting to move in the right direction. But do you think we're generally in a good place right now for drone innovation, or are we still a few steps behind the global leaders?
I think there's an interesting kind of diagram, I think from the Harvard Business School, where you looked at where a lot of the technology around robotics and drones were invented versus where they're produced. And you look at, fundamentally, I think over 90% of all these components, all the building blocks of these drones are built in China at the moment. I think that has to change for national resilience. Therefore, we're not starting in a particularly bad place, but it could always improve. It could always be better. And so you're seeing a lot more kind of focus, a lot more commitment to building factories, building center of excellences in the UK. So I think it's a great place because we have the advantage, we have the fortunate position that we've got amazing academic institutions. We've got some of the best universities in the world. We've got a lot of the raw intellectual power coming through, which is creating a lot of the intellectual property that is going into this technology, where we can just harness more of that in the UK. And by having the factories building drones, by having the companies who are designing and creating this technology, it gives you the opportunity to have jobs in this sector in the UK in a sustained way. And if you sustain it, people then don't have to venture abroad. They can stay right here in the UK to kind of get after careers in these areas, in engineering, in communications, in all these different things which kind of really feed into technology. So they're really, really positive, and I kind of back that wholeheartedly.
No, that's great. And that's good to hear because, like I say, sometimes people like to talk and say how the UK is always further behind and stuff. So it's nice to know that your thoughts on that. And when you look at where drone technology and autonomy are heading over the next few years, whether that's in
Mhm.
defense, logistics, or everyday life, what areas do you personally find most exciting and full of potential?
Well, I think for the most part, probably the biggest impediment at the moment is regulations in terms of unlocking the ability to the technology for the most part is there. We could be doing kind of drone delivery. We've seen pilot schemes of companies delivering kind of blood works to Outer Hebrides and things like that. So flying in these kind of corridors. I think there's been a lot of sandboxing over the last near decade, but I think it's really progressing forward to when we can see more mass kind of uptake in the utilization, especially on the logistical side. Uh, One thing I see, the yeah, urban air mobility, AAM area, transportation, you're seeing increasingly pilot schemes happening in other nations. And for the most part, I think that the UK is a densely populated place. That I think there's been some positive moves in terms of us going towards the regulatory framework of SORA, or specific operational risk assessment, which then looks at a lot more at the ground risk of any operations in certain areas, like the sail levels and things like that. So I think that there's definitely regulatory unlocking which needs to happen before we're in a position for the technology and the uptake and adoption to progress. I think on the defense side, I come from my academic background is in genetics. I read human genetics at University College London for my undergrad, and really I look at that kind of predator prey relationship between drones, countering drones, and then counter of drones, like you're trying to fly your drones but someone else is trying to stop you. So you see a lot of that current evolution of kind of drone warfare going on, which follows that pendulum swinging of the advantage and the reaction and the counter reaction. And so really kind of keeping head is that fundamental difficulty. But what you're also seeing, you've probably heard it many times before, is that the drone warfare battle is very much, history doesn't repeat, but it sure does rhyme. It's very much following that same progression that you saw with the air war from the First World to Second World War, going from things which weren't really fit for purpose, people dropping kind of bricks and grenades out the side of biplanes, to then having machine guns which shot through the propellers, to then roll forward into Second World War, we have the bombers achieving the task, the fighters on the other side trying to stop them, the fighters on your side trying to stop those. And what you're increasingly seeing is that drone on drone warfare evolution, and that kind of move towards kind of offensive and defensive capabilities to really kind of enable a lot of the drone warfare at the moment. So that's one of the areas I find most fascinating. You're kind of seeing it accelerates as it goes through. So even then, they can get kind of sub-munitions onto aircraft to kind of defeat other drones and the like. You're kind of really seeing it go forward, and you can almost fast forward that forward and see where the technology is going at the moment. And for the most part, it's, autonomy is able to be done when no one's trying to stop you. So you do a lot of autonomy utilizing uh, global navigation satellite systems like GPS and GLONASS and by doing the rest of it. But as soon as that's denied to you, it becomes more challenging. You have to do alternative navigation. As soon as your adversary does clever things like mask the shape of their tanks, then you have to do something else. There's always a kind of a low tech counter to a high tech solution for the most part. So it's really how you mix the practical and the technological. And I think that for the most part, I find it quite interesting where the incentives around defense innovation are more geared towards going towards the high tech end of things, because you have to build that kind of capability moat around what you're making. Whereas a lot of the time you see that the lower tech human ingenuity kind of solutions kind of usually carry over. So, and look at that in terms of use of fiber optic drones, kind of the space pencil version compared to kind of a lot of the kind of highly autonomous systems, which are more of the kind of space pen, as it were. But that's the areas that really kind of I find fascinating to see the developments over this time, and it will continue to develop at an absolute rate of knots.
No, I think that's a great answer. And for innovators and startup founders trying to build something new, especially in areas like autonomy and defense tech, where do you think separates those who succeed and those who struggle to get off the ground?
Uh, I think for the most part, I think it's a number of things really, and the first one is, I get a lot of founders come to me and say, I want to be the next X or next Y. And for the most part, I kind of say, okay, it's really getting after what the value is that you're adding to the industry. I think it's very easy, a lot, especially in the last few years, you get a lot of people coming to you with a quadcopter solution looking for a problem. So, when you think about defense capability and really kind of starting from base principles, you start off really by looking at the effect you want to have, not the hardware you've got to achieve that solution. So starting off with, okay, what effect I want to have, and then what are the multitude of areas that could be done in order to achieve that. So for the most part, especially my thoughts around kind of a lot of drone interception and things like that is that for the most part, you're trying to solve for three different things. You're trying to solve for range, altitude, and speed. Well, you can create a very cheap missile effectively and mount that onto a fixed wing drone, which can has the range and the altitude, and then you can just do the last speed bit with something which is kind of cheap and cheerful. So it's a lot of the advice I kind of give, or the thoughts I have on it, is really think through what you're trying to solve, what your value proposition is, who will actually want that, and who's willing to pay for it. I think that a lot of the time, especially now, you're getting people who don't necessarily have a defense background kind of get into defense, which is great. It brings kind of diversity of thought, but then it's really understanding how to navigate a lot of the defense industry, which is which can be tricky. I think it's getting better. You have more innovation units, so getting noticed by those, the likes of the J hubs or the DASs and things like that, to kind of get your ideas noticed. I think it's really important. And then it's really just being a case of understanding the realities of, unless you already have a pre-existing reputation within the industry where you'll find it easier to raise money, then really you're having to kind of start with a reputation from scratch, and people potentially won't be falling over themselves to kind of give you large amounts of money to get after your idea. So being prepared to get down and dirty, to bootstrap, to actually take more of a pragmatic approach to what you're doing, and being not too wedded to any particular idea, really, any particular one thing, and being able to have that kind of flexibility to adapt, to iterate. Half the time, the thing you start off by wanting to do isn't the thing you start off, you eventually end up kind of getting success from. So really, it's being flexible, being adaptable, and in that way, being hard to kill as a company. Being very kind of ready to do what it takes to kind of survive in quite a competitive world.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, and I think you've, like I say, give some really great answers. I've just got 3 conclusion questions. If you could go back and speak to 20-year-old Karl Eze, what life and work advice would you give yourself, and why?
I think for the most part, I'd probably say that everyone leaves the military eventually, and so really kind of plan for what comes afterwards. I'd probably look into the fact that have more have more confidence in your own ability. I think definitely, because you always assume that there are others far smarter, far better in certain different ways. And when you kind of really get into you realize that effort does lead to outcomes, and so the ability to kind of have that kind of perseverance at the early stage. And actually, and I think for the most part, so what we hit on when we were speaking about the lack of financial knowledge that we have as children in schools and education, really, no one really speaks to you that much. You don't have many examples of entrepreneurs around you. Actually, you just expect when you're younger that you just go out, get a job, and kind of go in a career and kind of progress in that way. But actually, you have more of an ability to kind of shape the world around you by creating things with your bare hands, by creating companies and actually getting people behind an idea and growing it out from there. And it's only when you've got that experience that maybe you haven't had a lot of those practical demonstration from others, that actually it's not as daunting as you think. Yes, it's very difficult, but if you create those milestones, those stepping stones in the way to achieve the aim you want, then you can do it. So I think be more ambitious.
No, I think that's a great answer as well, mate. When you look at the next decade and of defence innovation, what do you hope your biggest personal contribution will be?
So for the most part, I think it comes down to really, for what I do with the work around kind of small drone warfare, with FPV drones and the rest of it, it's really my contribution I want to make is to set up the next generation of defense technologists, in the UK, in a way where they're able to shortcut to where I think we need to be in this country, where we need to have much more innate knowledge, and really so all the work I do on that, which effectively is charitable work, that's like kind of my biggest wish in terms of contributing to the nation, to national security, to have that next generation able to kind of get after and get kind of the dirt on the fingernails of this kind of technology, so we kind of get to and stay at the forefront of it, really. And if I achieve that, then I'll be happy.
No, I think that's fair enough. My final question, I asked both Eric and James this as well. They both gave me fantastic book recommendations, and I always say knowledge is power. There's one book you can recommend to me and everybody else. What would it be?
One book is difficult. There's so many good books. I think I probably think of a few books and then probably have to pick one. So anywhere between 1,000 Brains, which looks at the way in which the brain has been has evolved over time, how it works as different interconnected systems, and really when you look at the development of AGI in terms of that artificial general intelligence, I think it's going to follow and track more of that progression than the path we're currently on with large language models and the rest of it. I think that another really good book that I read was Chip Wars, and really I had a thought around how you position yourself in the market to be non-zero sum in terms of competition. I think is like vitally important. Really important. So how you serve, and that's a lot of what I base Point Zenith off of, in terms of how you serve the most number of people and be the one handing out the picks and shovels in the gold rush, rather than kind of panning yourself. And then another really good book which shaped a lot of my thinking, is either Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman, absolutely revolutionary in terms of the thought and understanding around how people think and work, and then Never Split the Difference, another great book, which is great for negotiations, and especially they don't teach you how to negotiate salaries and things like that in the military. And so that was a book which was really instrumental for me when I went into finance. It was really good. So if I was to pick one of all those books I've just kind of thrown at you, I'd probably say the one that's probably had the most impact on me is Thinking Fast and Slow, really, in terms of fundamentally trying to understand the human condition, the fact that we're not generally as rational beings as kind of on that mass scale that people think we are, and that you have to understand what makes us fundamentally tick in terms of our ability to understand our own biases, especially in business, understand where you're having, you know, confirmation bias or halo effect or things like that, and really take that check and try and think in a different way and actually use your higher brain. I think that will stand you in good stead. So a
No,
few books, that's the one
yeah,
I'd go.
I've written all of them down, and I know a lot of the people because I run a group myself. You see, and they always love it when these recommendations come. So, like I say, we picked up Eric was a random walk down Wall Street, and I already had the one that James was, which was 48 Laws of Power.
Yeah, Billions
So
of Power.
yeah, so it's always good to pick new books out of knowledge of people. It is. Karl, I really appreciate you taking your time to come and speak to me. I really do appreciate it because I know you guys are really busy, so it does mean a lot when you can spare some time to come and have a chat.
No, it's more than happy to chat. It's good questions as well, which helps.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Karl.
Cheers.